Hey, what's up, everybody? Jonathan Bailor back with another episode of the SANE Show, and very excited today because we are going to cover something that I personally have a lot of questions about. And we have two people here that are going to share mad insight with us. Friend of the show, Jimmy Moore, and for the first time ever, his lovely wife, Christine Moore. Welcome. How you guys doing?
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, doing really, really well. And I just want to get right into it, Jimmy and Christine, because I feel like you must have a magic, you must be able to see into the future. Because I feel like when we were talking 8 years ago, keto this, keto that, you wrote a book called Keto Clarity, and everyone was like, well, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe. And now it's taken over the world. What happened? What happened?
Dumb luck, Jonathan. No, it was funny because, I've been in the low carb space since I lost 180 pounds on the Atkins diet in 2004. So that was my foray into low carbdom. And then, of course, paleo came around somewhere around 2009 primal with Mark Sisson's book. And then paleo big time when Rob Wolf's book came out, the Paleo Solution, in 2010. Right around 2011, though, I was following a lot of the researchers out there that were looking at low carb diets, Jeff Folek, Steve Finney, and they were writing books about this. And so I was reading their books, and I remember reading one of their books where they started talking about testing for blood ketones. Now, ketones to me as an Atkins dieter was peeing on these little strips that were gross, but it turned pink to purple and showed some level of fat burning taking place. So they introduced me to testing blood ketones. So that got the nerdiness in me coming out in full force. And so that's when I started officially testing ketosis. That was in 2012. I started reading their books and stuff like around 2011. So yeah, I've been doing this a very long time. Did that experiment with nutritional ketosis, which eventually did turn into Keto Clarity. And yeah, it's amazing to me how everybody today is a keto expert, when back in the day, I'm like, where were all you people? Because I felt like I was the lonely voice in the wilderness for a while.
And here's a possibly ignorant question, and I'm hoping if there's anyone in the world that can answer it, it's the two of you. Is the keto diet different than the low carb / Atkins diet that you were talking about 8 years ago?
Yep, it is. Because Dr. Atkins, he got the carbohydrate restriction right, but then he told people to eat all the fat and protein to society that they wanted. But protein for some people can be a problem.
Well, he said eat unlimited fat and protein, but then because of the fat phobia, Jonathan, that still exists to this day, they're not very sane eaters, in my opinion. You like what I did there? That they defaulted to the leaner cuts. And so chicken breast with broccoli became a low carb meal, very good low carb meal, but not very ketogenic meal, because you weren't replacing those carbohydrates with another fuel source, which we believe for a well-formulated ketogenic diet should be dietary fat.
Yep.
Got it. So is it fair to say that the keto diet is, well, so you in the past, because I went on a low carb cruise with both of you, it was a lovely experience, and you would always say low carb, high fat. You wouldn't just say low carb. So is keto the popularization of low carb, high fat versus just low carb?
Absolutely. And see, I think low carb can get in trouble because low is, number one, relative. So low carb to the SAD diet, which has 300 grams of carbohydrates, you could go down to 150 and be lower carb, but that's still not anywhere close to what I would describe as a low carb diet. And then ketogenic puts a finer point on it, saying, okay, you're not only lowering the carbohydrates, but when you lower them to a significant level, you have to replace those calories you were getting from there with some other source of calories, which gives you energy. That's where the fat comes in. So when you shift from being a sugar burner to a fat burner, you've got to replace the energy that you were eating from the carbohydrates with more fat. Now, not gorging yourself on fat. Sometimes people say, oh, it's the bacon and butter diet. And okay, nobody's telling you to just eat bacon and butter, although that does sound pretty good. I'm just kidding. But at the end of the day, you're making choices about what's going to satiate you. So I can go many hours between meals now because of that higher fat intake is so satiated.
Why do you think there's always backlash, there's always controversy, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the keto diet, thinking that it is very animal based. Not that that's even wrong, but it seems like, if I'm understanding this correctly, you could be a vegan and eat low carb, high fat all day.
There's actually a book out there about it. My Keto Talk, I do a podcast on Thursdays called Keto Talk, and my co-host on that show is a functional medicine practitioner named Dr. Will Cole. He wrote a whole book about this called Ketotarian. So free plug for my co-host, Dr. Cole, but amazing. And he shows you, okay, yeah, if you want to be a vegan or vegetarian, here are ways that you can do it. Of course, he's promoting, if you can eat fish, that's great. If you can add eggs, that's even better to get some of the complete proteins. But other than that, the template's very simple. Just get more fat in the diet, minimize the culprit carbohydrates in the diet, because you're not eating grains, you're not eating any starchy carbs. It's going to be mostly green leafy vegetables, non-starchy vegetables. So yeah, it is possible to do it in that template.
Would it, I would almost argue in some ways, wouldn't it, because if you're trying to minimize protein intake, nuts, coconut, macadamia nuts, avocado, coconut manna, it's not hard to eat, at least in my experience, 1,000 calories of plant fats. Has that been your experience? Because that also seems like that would help. It would make it easier to avoid protein to the extent you're trying to do that.
So I don't think we want to avoid protein per se, but I know what you're saying, avoid the gobs of protein. That is the one challenge for people that are doing this through kind of a vegetarian vegan template, is where do you get protein if you're not eating fish and eggs, because you can't eat beans, too many carbs. Maybe pea protein becomes the source. But yeah, you still want an obligate amount of those essential amino acids, because they are essential for a reason.
Yeah.
You can't. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's hard to get your complete source of protein, because animal products are a complete source of your essential amino acids.
The only ones.
Yeah, so it's a bit trickier if you do vegan, vegetarian, but if you do add in the fish, it does make it a little bit easier, or eggs, it does make it easier, yeah.
So let's talk about the quality of fats a little bit. Certainly you talk about a well-formulated versus not well-formulated, and there's tremendous research around, there are different kinds of fats, just like, not a calorie isn't a calorie, fat isn't fat. What would you say is the most therapeutic ratio or ratio between the types of fats within the ideal, optimal, sane, dare I say, keto diet?
For me, I tell my clients to get 60% monounsaturated fat sources, and then 30% saturated, and then 10% polyunsaturated. So each of those have a different function. Your monounsaturated fats and your polyunsaturated fats are anti-inflammatory in nature, if those polyunsaturated fats are not the ones that are on the store shelves that you see in those oils. Those particular oils, you have to make sure they are not in clear bottles. They need to be in dark bottles, and they need to be cold pressed and organic. That way, those are haven't been processed. Those oils are very sensitive to heat. So the ones on store shelves have been gone through a heating process, and so those two, your saturated fats are inflammatory in nature, but don't let that scare you. You need to have a source. Your body needs to inflame before it can heal. So a proper immune function, like if you scratch yourself or you get a rash, that's your body inflaming, so that the body can send the white blood cells to where it needs to go, so it can then anti-inflame, if that makes sense.
Talk about what that looks like on a plate, because you talk about monounsaturated being 60, saturated being 30, and poly 10. What would that translate to on a plate?
That's a good question. So you can have
John.
You can have a few nuts on your plate. You can have avocados is a good source of I believe it is monounsaturated fats, like olive oil. Yeah. So you can dress a salad with some olive oil. And then you have, for your saturated fats, you can have a piece of meat. Like fish has a lot of omega-3s in it, so those are anti-inflammatory in nature. But like your your steak, things like that.
Well, and since you only have 30% of your calories, of fat calories coming from saturated fat, then that easily makes it possible to moderate down on the protein. Because if you get naturally occurring sources of saturated fat, it gets up there pretty quick if you start eating a lot of steak. So you're not talking about a 16-ounce ribeye. You're talking about maybe a 6-ounce type of piece of meat that has fat in it, and that's where you get the 30%.
And you can add some sort of sauce on top of your steak that's monounsaturated based. So yeah, it's really easy.
Well, and that's just, it's fascinating that you say 60% monounsaturated and then the 10% polyunsaturated, because I think it is a very interesting thought experiment. Because even when we talk about saturated fat, I mean, obviously coconut is a fantastic form of saturated fat. The monounsaturated fats, you mentioned avocado, olive oil, macadamia nuts. I mean, these are all plant foods. So often the keto diet is conflated with this animal-based, pillaging the environment, socially irresponsible way of eating. But it seems like it is, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm getting 60% of my calories from monounsaturated fats, if I'm on a keto diet, by default, even if I'm not a vegan, is that plant-based in terms of where my calories are coming from?
So I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate because I know you like that. So in meats, there's not just saturated. And this is kind of a common misconception about the foods that we eat. People hear like hamburger meat. Oh, it's all saturated fat. Like it's like 100% this gloppy mess on a plate. When in actuality, most meats are a nice mix of monounsaturated and saturated fats. And so it's a fascinating kind of education piece, Jonathan, when you start talking about those kinds of things, because the perception in the minds of most people is that that's just a big plate of saturated fat, partly because the media has described it that way, and partly just ignorance of the general public about where their food comes from, which is why we wrote our book, Real Food Keto. We're trying to get people to pay attention to these kind of things. But to your point, yeah, you could make the argument that that means you want to include a lot more plant-based foods, but I don't think you have to. There is this movement right now that's kind of a subcurrent of the keto movement called carnivore. And so there's people that are doing a mostly animal-based foods type of diet, and a lot of them are thriving in that. And I think because they choose the different kinds of meats that mix up the styles of fat, that it's not all saturated fat, it's a good mix of the ones like we've talked about here today, that they're doing really well with that.
Yeah, and getting organ meats on that particular diet is very important.
For the micronutrition, right?
Yep.
I love that you made that point, because I remember back in the early days when Gary Taubes wrote Good Calories, Bad Calories, correct me if I'm wrong, but that seemed fairly ketogenic. And he went on the Dr. Oz show, and he was making a point about bacon and the fat profile of bacon, and how bacon is portrayed to be this saturated fat loaded monstrosity. And he shed some surprising light on that.
You're aging yourself now. That you and I have been in this space so long. We remember Gary Taubes being on the Dr. Oz show. And mind you, Dr. Oz mocked him on that show. And now all these years later, Oz is now doing shows all about how wonderful the ketogenic diet is. So it's amazing how a little time passing changes things.
Yeah, people do think that pork bacon is mostly saturated, but it's a mix. Yeah,
it's a good mix.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, give me a example of key things you think people should watch out for. So if they're interested in the keto diet, if they're hearing about it everywhere, give me maybe the top 3 precautions someone should take before typing keto diet into the search engine.
Well, I think, and that's an excellent question. That's why he's a professional podcaster. It's an excellent question, because I think people don't embrace real food soon enough. And Jonathan, if somebody had told me when I first started on the Atkins diet that the goal is to get to real whole foods sooner than later, I would have done it. But it took me a little while. I kind of wandered in the wilderness a while until paleo came around, really started convincing me a lot of that real food would be the component. So that would be one. Real whole foods to get all the micronutrients, which give you a plethora of benefits that go well beyond the macros. Another one that I would say is don't overdo it on the protein. I think people hear ketogenic diet, high protein, and it's not a high protein diet. It's high in fat. So you've got to realize that when you remove the carbs from the diet, you replace those carbs with another fuel source. When you're a fat burner, you need fat in your diet. Now, that's not gorging yourself on sticks of butter, but it means eating fat to satiety. Again, I wish somebody had told me that was kind of the goal, because for a while I was still fearful of fat. And so that's a big one. And then the last one is one you've hit on for years. Stop worrying about the darn calories, because the calories aren't telling you the whole picture. I would be more interested in you figuring out what the quality of those calories are doing in your body, and allowing your body to tell you, and start listening to your body, perhaps for the first time in your life. I mean, I used to drink 16 cans of Coca-Cola a day, and I'd eat at fast food 2-3 times a day, and I'd eat whole boxes of Little Debbie snack. That was my history. And now I can go 18, 20, 24 hours between meals, and it's no big deal for me. So let all of that become intuitive. And I think if we became more intuitive eaters, there wouldn't be squabbles over, well, this diet's better than that diet's better than. You would just eat for you.
Yeah, and the only thing that I can really add to that, because I agree with those, I would say, coming from a nutritional therapy practitioner standpoint, make sure that your digestion is in order, because you're going to need to be able to digest those proteins and fats properly. The main point of digestion for your proteins is in your stomach, so you need proper amounts of stomach acid, and frankly 9 out of 10 people are deficient in stomach acid.
9 out of 10,
and,
big.
Yeah, and so you need to make sure you're producing enough stomach acid, and then to be able to absorb and digest those fats properly, you need to make sure that your bile is flowing. If you have gallbladder problems, you need to be taking some digestive enzymes to help with that. So, I mean, I have to do that. I don't have a gallbladder, so I need to take digestive enzymes for that. So those, from my perspective, that's what someone would need to be aware of, because you are increasing the amount of protein and fat.
You don't have a gallbladder and you do keto? Why are you not dead?
Where did it go? It fell out. No, I'm just kidding.
I lost it somewhere along the way.
So Jimmy and Christine, I know you've been doing this for a very long time. So this very last question, I'm interested to hear the answer to. Like, what are you working on now? What's the thing that's got you excited now? Because you've been in this space so long.
Wow. I mean, there are a couple of things, but I would say the next big thing is gut health. We just don't know a lot about it. And I just know, I mean, for instance, just today I found out, my dad has H. pylori. We thought his cancer might have returned, but it is in fact Helicobacter pylori.
Hello, what?
Helicobacter pylori.
It's a hell of a word you just said there, sir.
That that happens because he's not producing enough stomach acid. And then if you're not producing enough stomach acid, those bad gut bugs are going to get further down in the digestive system and mess up your gut health. So 60% of your immune system is in your gut, and then 90% of serotonin production is in the gut. So if your gut is unhealthy, you're going to probably struggle with some mental disorders like depression. You're going to develop, we all have a certain amount of permeability in our intestines, but these undigested foods and these bad gut bugs increase the permeability of our intestines. So these foreign particles can get into our bloodstream, and that's what leads to autoimmune disease. So I think gut health is something just very fascinating that I want to learn more about.
And for me, Jonathan, I think we've gotten the low carb message. It's been out there forever. And I think a lot of people, because of the popularity of keto in the culture the past few years, if they are embracing that way of eating, they're getting that part. What we're not getting is all of the ancillary things that could enhance that keto. So what's got me jazzed is, what are some like biohacks that we could add to the ketogenic diet? Things like photobiomodulation and infrared sauna and cold thermogenesis, ice baths and things like that, HIIT training. So many things that I think a lot of people putting such obsessive focus on the diet, they totally neglect all of these lifestyle things. And to me, they're all a part of the same journey. And people want to say, well, you're doing biohacking over here and you're doing, no, they're the same journey. And when we look at our bodies as a totality, and we put in like gratitude, and we put in like all of these things apply to your journey where you're trying to be healthier, whether you call it keto, whether you call it sane, whether you call it paleo, whatever floats your boat, we're all trying to add things to that journey. And that's what's got me jazzed. I'm actually working on a book with Dr. John Lemansky about this, coming out a little bit later in the year, called Keto Plus. We want people to say, hey, look, keto's cool, but keto plus all of these other things might be the missing element as to why you're not reaching your goals.
What a great title, Keto Plus. I like that. That's a very, very good title. And speaking of good titles, if you're watching the video, you can see in the background, Keto Clarity. You know, you were there before a lot of people were, so we're just catching up. So definitely pick up a copy of Keto Clarity. And Jimmy and Christine, where can folks go to get more of you, experience all the goodness? There it is, Real Food Keto. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
So this book came, really, I had no interest in writing a book when I was going through the nutritional therapy practitioner program. But the more that I learned, I'm like, this information is just simply not being talked about. So we talk about digestion and how that works. We talk about vitamins and minerals. There are one chapter devoted specifically to minerals, one devoted specifically to vitamins, and we list the signs of deficiencies of each. And in the back of the book, we have food sources of these vitamins and minerals, so you can take that with you shopping. We talk about the endocrine system and how it is practically impossible to balance your hormones unless you have your blood sugar under control. So we talk about that. We talk about proper hydration. We call water the fourth macronutrient. It's the most common nutritional deficiency. So this book is just full of information. It's not just another keto book. We're trying to get that across to people.
We put keto in the title, but don't let that fool you. If you're doing sane, you're going to learn a lot of stuff in this book, because she did go through that really intensive program. And I remember walking through the house while she was going through, hearing all the lectures. I'm going, what the heck is a prostaglandin? What is the duodenum? I ain't never heard some of these words before, and so I had to like go look up in a dictionary. So now I know how she felt all these years I was talking about low carb stuff. But yeah, we think it's a totality resource for general health. Again, I don't write keto books just for writing keto books. I write things that have new information in them that hopefully help people on their journey, regardless of your health journey.
Beautiful. So give us the title of that book one more time.
Real Food Keto.
Real Food Keto. And where can we go online to learn more?
So that book, we have a website for it, realfoodketo.com. Yep. And then I have a website, rebootingyournutrition.com, where you can contact me.
And I recently rebranded all my stuff. It's now all under LLVLC, stands for Living La Vida Low Carb, LLVLC.com.
Beautiful. Well, Jimmy and Christine, thank you so much. There are some people that just come up and go away, and they're just popping up, and you guys are like the original gangsters in this space. And I love the fact that you're as passionate and as fired up and as dedicated to the truth and helping people today as you were a decade plus ago. So kudos to you, and thank you for doing that again. Everybody, that book is Real Food Keto. And Jimmy and Christine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I think he just called us old.
I think so too.
Like a fine wine, better with age. So again, everybody, that was Jimmy Moore and Christine Moore. The book again is Real Food Keto. Definitely check that out. Check them out online. And remember, stay sane.